welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and presented by ICF International. Today's webinar is entitled Challenges and Benefits of Modular System Design and Development. I am Joyce Rose, your host and moderator for today's webinar. Attendees are encouraged to participate in our webinar with questions and comments. All of the participant lines are muted now, but we will open them for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. However, please be aware that you can submit questions at any time using the GoToWebinar chat feature, and those too will be answered or addressed during the Q&A session. Now, should we run out of time, we will respond to your questions via email, and/or should you have additional questions, you may submit those to me at the email listed on the slide.
Joyce can be reached via email at joyce@kassets.com.
Also, if you have any topics that you'd like to recommend as potential webinars, please do not hesitate to contact me. The Division of State Systems within the Children's Bureau continues to provide a series of monthly webinars supporting information sharing and discussion. Certainly, understanding who is attending the webinars helps us to identify content that is applicable for everyone participating in an agency's CWIS efforts. Please select one of the 5 categories listed, and my colleague Elizabeth will now conduct the poll. Elizabeth?
Okay, so you all should see on your screen a list of categories for who is attending today's webinar. If you can go ahead and select the category that fits you best. If you're participating in a room with a group of your colleagues, if you could choose the category that best fits the most people in the room, that would be great. And we'll go ahead and give you all just a couple of more seconds to finish answering. So for today, we have 43% state CWIS project managers, 32% state CWIS program policy or technical staff, and 25% ACF Children's Bureau personnel or contractors.
0% are Tribal Child Welfare Infosystem project managers, and 0% are Tribal Child Welfare Infosystem program, policy, or technical staff. Joyce resumes as presenter.
That is a fantastic mix of disciplines, and we certainly do appreciate your response to the poll. So let us now go ahead and meet today's distinguished presenters. After many years in the private sector, Valter Borges joined the Connecticut Department of Children and Families in the area of database administration, reporting, data integration, and consolidation. Inspired by the work DCF was starting to plan in modernizing its SACWIS, and eager to use his experience in application development, Valter began working with the team on creating a framework that would use modern technologies and borrow from many software engineering principles and concepts to help the team produce a myriad of SACWIS modules. Valter went on to lead the team and build modules for Title IV eligibility, case reviews, document management, provider portal, and a real-time data exchange with the Department of Education. At the moment, his attention is focused on replacing the SACWIS system in Connecticut with a new, modern, comprehensive child welfare information system. Abe Lee's background is as a licensed clinical social worker and foster care worker in Chicago for over 10 years. He led health and human service system implementations throughout the world when working with Kurum software, joining Diona in 2013 to identify and create mobile solutions catering to the needs of social workers and health and human service clients. Having played bass guitar for over 30 years, he loves to jam with friends in San Francisco, where he lives with his wife Suzette and their pet fish, Gandalf and Frodo. Abe, please start our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I forgot that that's what I sent you as my bio, and I feel very awkward now. But anyway, I want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you all today, to the Children's Bureau and ICF. It is quite a privilege for me. And as Joyce shared, I do have my background in the child welfare domain, starting off in Chicago in the early 90s. And I have to say that right now, considering the weather and how it's been, I'm really glad that I moved to San Francisco so I can avoid snow. In preparing for today's presentation, I decided that, doing the research, trying to look at what kind of statistical information there was, I wasn't sure whether or not there would be very much from a government perspective. But I'm happy to say that the trail has truly been blazed, not only in the private sector, but in the government sectors as well with regards to modular design. So I'm going to be able to share some anecdotal as well as some real-life, real-world examples of what this looks like. So we can go to the next slide. I want to talk about the agenda really quickly. In the next half an hour, I really would like to spend a little bit of time just setting a foundation, getting a common understanding of what we're looking at. In regards to the most common implementation strategy or philosophy that's being employed today in most government sectors, which is known as a grand design approach. I'm going to spend the majority of my time contrasting that to the modular design approach to system implementation. I'll explain what that is in a bit. And finally, I'm going to wrap up my half hour by looking at some potential next steps to consider, highlighting things that you should think about if you decide that modular design is really the way that you need to or want to go. So if we go to the next slide, grand design. I'd like to, before we move off of this particular heading slide, I want to talk a little bit about what grand design is and to tell you the truth, admit to you that I have a bit of a bias. Before we get too far, I have experienced a number of implementations as a systems integrator, and I've had the opportunity to do quite a bit of reading in this area. And I'll tell you that personally, I'm not a huge fan of the grand design approach. The more and more I read about what this approach is, and I don't mean to, poo-poo on the idea behind grand design. I understand its value in many cases. But as I started preparing for this presentation and discussing this with some of my colleagues, one of my colleagues actually mentioned to me, if you were to look at how just nature works in general and the world around us, what you see is that change typically happens incrementally. Radical, large-scale events or shifts usually result in some cataclysmic disaster or like an extinction-level event. And so what I believe is that grand design often lends itself to a bit of hubris. It's an attempt to try to control everything from start to finish. And unfortunately, as the old saying goes, pride does come before the fall. But in the next slide, it gives a bit of an explanation or a foundation of what grand design is defined as. So the grand design approach, also known as a Big Bang approach, it's been described by some government reports as a monolithic mentality to system implementation. Its intent behind it is to rip and replace typically many or a major legacy system in its entirety. And I want to mention and point out the very first bullet here. It says that grand design assumes that responsible development necessitates fully detailing all requirements before work can start. And I do want to emphasize here that it is starting with the concept of responsible development. Grand design, at its core, intends to do things correctly, and so it wants to do it responsibly. It's just that experience may not lend itself to utilizing this method in the future. But we'll get to that in a bit. Grand design ultimately isn't intending to just look at the big picture. It really intends to require the entire picture. The actual rollout process may look at a function-by-function release schedule, but the project really can't start until all the pieces are in place and ready to go. It is a fairly typical approach, and it's usually very costly, and more often than not, quite massive. And it really does aim for sweeping reinvention of an agency's computer system and processes, and it usually requires a change management component and a developer training component, a heavy business analysis, just a lot of different things that need to be considered as you're going through the grand design process. Now, there was an article back in 2010 in FCW, which is Federal Computer Week. It was calling for the demise of the grand design approach. The OMB, the executive branch, were all saying that this is really not the right way to go anymore. And this is back in 2010. We go on to the next slide. It really does highlight a few of the issues that have been identified or challenges identified with the grand design approach. You've seen them probably yourself in failed projects. These particular challenges were identified in a paper produced by the OMB, procurement guidance paper for the White House. And you'll see the grand design approach, typically projects that use it are overly large, overly complex. They typically result in costly overruns, scheduling snafus. The process of gathering all the requirements, because you need to have them all before really this project can start in earnest, they can be taking an inordinate amount of time, and this slow pace of implementation will make it extremely difficult to mitigate risks, difficult to mitigate financial exposure, because it is so slow and tedious. And such implementations become a low priority because it's taking so long that no longer become pertinent to the administration. The funds that were originally allocated for a brand new technology suddenly has been allocated for a technology that's antiquated or outdated. There's little flexibility typically in budgets with government spending, and so unforeseen constraints like an economic downturn can suddenly wreak havoc on a project that's going so slowly. If we go to the next slide, I just want to mention that there's Code for America, an amazing organization. There's Dan Hahn was talking about California, and he talked about California and their new approach to the Child Welfare System Replacement Project. And what he wrote in his blog is this: we've known for a while that large monolithic contracts for government services don't work. They're frequently late, over budget, and don't deliver what their users need. There are lots of reasons for this, enough for an unhelpful and unproductive exercise of finger-pointing in any number of directions: the vendors, the customers, regulations. See, the thing is, and he was trying to point this out in his article, in his blog post on the Code for America site, was that in reality, large projects, they're large. They just take a lot of time, and taking a lot of time typically results in missed opportunities. Because projects are unable to keep up with ever-changing technologies or ever-changing requirements, unfortunately, oftentimes they fail. The next slide includes a quote from a GAO high-risk report. And some of you may know that the U.S. Government Accountability Office, or GAO, they identify different areas that they deem to be high risk every 2 years, and is high risk due to vulnerabilities to things like waste or mismanagement, or areas just most in need of transformation. And in 2015, the process being used for IT projects throughout government was identified as one of those high-risk areas. And specifically, as it says in this quote, according to the Defense Science Board, this approach, or the grand design approach, is often too long, ineffective, and unaccommodating of the rapid evolution of IT. Further, it is inconsistent with OMB guidance directing that IT investments deliver functionality in 6-month increments. The next slide goes to the public view. These are government reports, which is great, and it doesn't necessarily get a lot of media attention, but unfortunately, oftentimes, failures in the grand design approach projects, they get a lot of media attention. These are just 3 examples when I did a quick search online for headlines that have come out in the last few years. The first one is from The Guardian in the UK. This was back in 2013, just a couple of years ago. It was a financial fiasco with the National Health Service in the UK. Reporter Rajeev Sayal wrote this: MPs on the Public Accounts Committee said final costs are expected to increase beyond the existing £9.8 billion because new regional IT systems for the NHS, introduced to replace the national program for IT, are also being poorly managed and are riven with their own contractual wrangles. He went on to say that further evidence of a systematic failure in the government's ability to draw up and manage large IT contracts was reported. The next one is the New York Times, billion-dollar flop. And it's back from 2012, and it's about the U.S. Air Force attempt to implement a whole new software system. And Randall Strauss was the reporter. He wrote, that for the United States Air Force, installing a new software system has certainly proven to be a wicked problem. The last one there is about the VA, and it says from the Washington Post, and it's a little bit older, it's from 2010, but it reported on the DVA's financial and logistics integrated technology enterprise, or otherwise known as their flight program, which unfortunately never took flight. It was terminated due to a budgetary freeze. Again, when things go so long, you're not able to respond to sudden downturns. They're a little closer to home for us here on this webinar is the healthcare.gov experience. And the Code for America website reported via medium.com that constructing the original enrollment system, which some of you know as the federally facilitated marketplace operating system, it cost $200 million, and it would have required $70 million a year to maintain. A quick epilogue to healthcare.gov. Now, the new version, which was revamped by the U.S. Digital Services Group with engineers from Google and a bunch of other startups, they were able to do this for $4 million versus the $200 million, and maintenance is going to be $4 million versus $70 million a year. So if we go on to the next slide, really there's got to be a better way. And I think that from my perspective, and what I like to introduce and posit is that the better way is by taking lessons learned from not only private industry, but different government organizations as well, which is modular design. The next slide gives a bit of a definition of what modular design is and what I mean by modular design. So modular design, unlike grand design, assumes that development requires flexibility. And I don't know if the slides progressed. I'm still seeing the title slide. There we go. So, as I said, unlike grand design, modular design assumes that development requires flexibility, and therefore it necessitates a view of the big picture, but understands that that big picture has to be broken up into smaller functional chunks or smaller modules that can be developed, implemented, potentially shared across agencies to interact with other small chunks or modules. In other words, the big picture is the sum of the smaller pictures, so you always have the big picture in mind, but it's really the smaller pictures working together that you start focusing on. And this isn't just a theoretical philosophy. It is being done today. And throughout the world in government agencies, you can see it actually happening. In the UK, there is an organization and group within government called the Government Digital Services. And this is from their website. They are responsible for the digital transformation of government. And their agency specifically works in an agile environment that responds to the user's needs, making technology a tool versus a barrier. And one of the key emphasis for GDS, which is the Government Digital Services, is to build and test in small chunks. New South Wales in Australia is a state there. They have a Department of Family and Community Services, which is the equivalent of child welfare in New South Wales. And they decided that they wanted to change their approach to system implementation by introducing a bid out for vendors to respond to modules of functionality. And what ended up happening is that you have these small pieces of functionality that allowed them to no longer look at building a system for reporting or anything like that, but rather around the story of a child, the narrative of a child. Their system actually is called the child story. These small modules of functionality has been working in a major way. One example is this. They decided that one area of need for them was an integration tool that allowed any worker to see all points of interaction between a child, their family, and every single government agency or private agency involved. And this is called patchwork that they implemented over there. And they tested it out. I think it took about a month's time of design, a month's time of development, and they tested it, tweaked it, tested it, and now it's being rolled out throughout the state of New South Wales. On this side of the pond, U.S. Digital Service, USDS, they are intended to redefine the experience of government by looking at simple solutions, one problem at a time. And they have a playbook, and it highlights the need to understand where the user is, understand what people need, by focusing on how people interact with the government, whether it's through a laptop, through a kiosk, through a phone, whatever it is, understanding the user interaction to then define what the technology approach should be for different interactions. And I want to bring up the California thing again because it is close to home for me and it's one that I know pretty well, paying attention to it. Their new approach to acquiring a solution to manage a child welfare system, again, Dan Hahn wrote in the Code for America blog, even with the hard work of the Department of Social Services and OSI over the past 2 years, the business-as-usual procurement for a new child welfare system would be risky. So based on experience, it would probably be late, over budget, and lack functionality or optimal usability. And so these are the reasons why a new child welfare system would be the candidate for a new modular, agile approach to delivering government technology. It is the way that many government organizations are trying to go. Going on to the next slide, the advantages of modular design. When you look at that, among the advantages is that using smaller chunks of functionality allows the implementation to focus on truly discrete, scalable, potentially reusable modules, shareable modules. It does reduce costs because it's smaller in scope. And typically requires less customization because you're looking at off-the-shelf type of products, hopefully. One other advantage is there is a smaller learning curve from a development perspective, again, smaller size. And it does increase flexibility because it lends itself naturally to responsiveness, to user interactions. And I want to focus on that for just one moment because you're delivering functionality, small pieces of functionality quickly. It allows people to look at it, play with it, test it, respond, and you can tweak. And that's one of the great advantages because you're now focusing on the individual. You do reduce risk and increase return by leveraging new technology whilst at the same time adhering to industry standards that are also leveraging new technology. And the term REST APIs, what it specifically is referring to is one type of language that's used to communicate between things like mobile devices and the internet or web-based services. And the whole thing is this. The intention here and the advantage of the modular design is that you keep the big picture in mind while you're deploying value in a timely fashion because you end up defining, developing, and deploying capabilities in months, not years. So it's quick. The next slide, very practically speaking, small modules, they allow opportunity to exploit current technology trends. Things that are happening in regards to cloud, improved analytics, mobility technology advances, these things are changing so rapidly, so quickly. You have to be flexible. You have to be nimble. And you have to be quick enough to be able to leverage these new technologies that you're going along. And really, finally, this is what I believe is the case right now is that more than likely your agency, your organization, is kind of doing this already, a modular design approach. Because if you consider this, any agency looking to implement a new system, a modular strategy or not, they're never going to be starting from a green field. They're always going to be starting from something. And there will always be multiple prior investments in technology, which will each have their own variety of capacities, varying capacities to integrate with other systems. Maybe some of these systems are able to talk to each other, some of them aren't. There was one project I was involved with that actually had 27 different siloed systems that had to be replaced. They wanted to replace all 27 with one new system. Now, some of these systems, they did talk to each other, some didn't. All of them had some information of importance, but none of them had all the information necessary about their clients. But if this is sounding familiar to you and sounds like maybe it's what your system is looking like now, it means that, at least from the way I see it, your state has already engaged in modular design. It was just given a different name at the time. Maybe it was called piecemeal, patchwork, haphazard, whatever. But the thing is this, it was born out of necessity rather than designed intentionally. And so now, with a new understanding of what modular design intends to be, you have the opportunity to build solutions in a modular fashion purposely and intentionally. So my background and my area of expertise at this point in time really is more focused on the mobility side. I want to give that as an example. So mobility, it provides an opportunity to bring in a tool, and again, it's just a tool, which can serve as an integration point that can intentionally tie those prior investments together while being ready for new technologies that are coming in. So the integration can be and should be done in phases. That's one of the main things about a modular design approach. And the intentionality of such an approach never intends to negate the need for an improved system. We understand that the systems need to be replaced and improved. But what it does is bringing in a small piece like this allows you a means by which smaller parts of the bigger puzzle can lead to finishing the big puzzle. So mobility, for example, provides a potential low-risk, high-return strategy that will help your agency unlock the value of your existing investments while rapidly providing relief to frontline staff who need help right now. Now, at the same time, you're protecting yourself, future-proofing the agency's technology investments. Basically, modularity, for example, through mobility, is about getting the most back from the past in the present and protecting yourself for the future. So if we go on to the next slide, I just want to take a moment to ask you, and please don't, I guess you could answer out loud if you wanted to since you're muted, but just ask yourself these 4 questions for a moment. And I'll give you 10 seconds to read through them.
The 4 questions on the slide are: 1. Do you have a single back-end system managing your data today? 2. Are your existing systems less than 3 years old? 3. Is your staff able to access and utilize their clients' data effectively? 4. Are your clients being supported effectively by the data being captured?
And I call this a bit of a self-assessment, and I'm going to guess that the majority of you, if not all of you, probably have said no to all these questions, in which case, more than likely you're ready for a modernization of your existing child welfare IT systems. But I want to mention something, and not that I want that the CCWIS or however the acronym is being called now, or the old SACWIS requirements aren't important. I understand that they are. But the underlying questions here are trying to point out a different thing, a different tone. First of all, the back-end systems, they exist. You have one there, or multiple. And we don't recommend removing them all at once. You want to do it one thing at a time. I like California's method. They call it a strangulation approach. And it sounds morbid, but it's really looking at squeezing out and decommissioning one of the legacy systems at a time, slowly, but making sure that you're leveraging what exists today. Also, these questions are trying to understand that you want to leverage existing technology while leveraging existing systems that you have in place. So moving in a modular fashion. And the last 2 questions really are focusing on the people. We're really thinking about what does your staff need. Your staff needs access to data wherever they are. So giving them that now, that's a priority for you. Your clients need to be supported all the time. That allows you to identify the priority for your modular approach. So if these ring true to you and you're thinking, okay, maybe modular design is a good thing to consider from an IT project perspective, it's worth talking about what some of the risks might be. So on the next slide, there are some of the things that you really should understand with regards to the risk before proceeding with a modular design approach. And one of the first things is that even though I said that this is something you are doing today for the most part, being modular that is, it was originally a process that was born out of necessity, not necessarily out of forethought. And now that you're going to change your mentality to intentionally proceed with building functional chunks, modules, it is new, and it has to be thought through. You know, what is the right size chunk or module? What's the right grouping of functionality? And how do I identify that? How do I work together with other groups to be able to identify something that can be shared? The second thing to consider is that you might be wrong. The thing is this, lessons learned from many successful startups, for example, today, Instagram, Pinterest, etc., they started off with a totally different approach to where they ended up today. The thing is that they started by being ready to be wrong. They were ready to do something called pivot, turn on a dime. We come in with an understanding of the business need based on assumptions that we have, but they may prove to be, unfortunately, way off when you start doing an implementation and testing it. At which point you need to be able to take advantage of the fact that the size and the scope of your project is small enough that pivoting is possible. The other thing is that business as usual, it cannot be business as usual when you're going down not just modular design, but really at any type of approach, because, if from a system implementator's perspective, project implementations today, regardless of what type of approach, if you're just rebuilding what exists today, it's not really improving or enhancing. You need to consider, for example, what is the real reason I'm doing X, Y, or Z? And can that be done differently using technology or processes that make more sense for the user? Finally, I think one of the things to consider is you just don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have legacy systems that they will have to be replaced, but they don't have to be replaced right now. So you leverage what exists today, build modules that will interact with those systems, but also be ready to interact with new systems using that common technical language. I have a bias as a part of the mobility world. I do think that mobility is a great resource and a source of engagement because it's portable, it's ubiquitous. Everyone knows it. Everyone has a phone. The percentage of smartphone users is growing exponentially today. And the whole idea, though, is that you want to be able to leverage technology that lets you utilize the past in the present while protecting yourself for the future. So if we can turn to the last slide, I want to end with a few different things to consider if you're going to go down the modular design approach. And the first one, I think, is the most important one, which is start with the people. You want to consider the work, not the process itself. You want to be responsive to individuals, not reactive to them. So I want to point out a few examples of where starting with the people has been highlighted in the government arena. For example, Code for America have a set of standards in regards to practice. And the very first one is this. It says in their practice standards, begin projects by conducting research with real people to understand who they are, what they need, and how they behave. Design programs and services around those needs. Continuously test with users and refine policy and processes. I want to read from the UK's Digital Government Service Standards, their manual, and the very first thing is that they require is that you put users first. In their manual, they say teams need to constantly iterate against user feedback. This means building and testing in small chunks, working quickly to deliver improvements to a service. California, again, during the vendor forum on December 18th last year, Peter Kelly, who is the CWS Deputy Director from OSI, he emphasized the importance of the user experience and I love this, and I will quote him. He said specifically with regards to the California implementation, he said, the user experience is the most important thing that we can achieve in this project. The users have to be the start. The second thing to consider is that you want to go small. And if there's folks from Texas, just to tweak their old adage, go small or go home. Basically, it's nothing. It's just the idea is that you want to take bite-sized chunks of capabilities that can be defined and built in short time frames so that it can be tested, tweaked, rebuilt, tested, tweaked, rebuilt, until you've got something that is so user-focused, so usable, that is going to be accepted immediately, making buy-in so much easier. There's a concept common in mobile development. It's called that should be considered. It's called micro-tasking, or it's called another term for it is micro-moments. And it's a focus on the user. The very first point is a focus on the user, and it requires an understanding of the types of interactions that users have with a back-end system, a system of record, an organization, whatever. And what modes of engagement that user will use to complete that particular interaction. So these are typically not long, drawn-out processes like completing an application. They're not long, they're small ones that focus on the even smaller actions that comprise the larger interaction. And the larger interaction, that would be the equivalent of a module or a chunk. And the small actions are the steps to complete that module. Those micro moments make up the module. And the reason I mention this here is because, as I shared earlier, modularity, for example, through mobility, is all about getting the most out of your existing systems, the past, right now, to protect yourself in the future. And the modular approach really needs to consider what are those small micro moments that people use, how are they interacting with the system, or how they need to. The last point is about leveraging technology, and I want to talk about this and wrap it up with a story. One of the questions I was asked, or that was raised to me as I was preparing for this presentation was, could you potentially share some what you think are common modules in child welfare? And I think that the majority of us on this call, including myself, we probably could state a few. Just based on our experience on the front lines or on implementations, things like a client master index, an intake module, an investigation module, a safety plan module, a court module. I mean, there's many that we could. But I want to suggest something. I want to suggest that maybe business as usual shouldn't be the method we use to define modules. It shouldn't be business as usual if you're going down a modular design approach. I think it's essential to look at, first of all, other programs. Consider how can, functionality or modules be shared between child welfare and adult protection, or child welfare and child care, or child welfare and juvenile justice, or child welfare and medical assistance. There's the potential there for the sharing and collaboration. But before even that, really, if the very first point of reference is to start with the people, then we need to stop and consider, instead of looking at how can I define functional modules, rather than doing it that way, consider how individuals, whether it's users, caseworkers, or clients, interact with the data. Or maybe how do they need to interact with the data? How do they interact with you as an organization? Or maybe how do they need to interact with you as an organization? So let's take an example. If the investigator is spending all of his or her time in the field, and one of the most important things for that investigator is to be able to see if that unidentified individual who they happen to find in a home is a potential threat to a child. There's a module. It's not an investigation module. It's a field background check module. You see, what you're doing is you're focusing on how does the user interact with the organization, with your systems, or how do they need to, and then utilizing that identification to define what is the technology that we can use to help them do their job. It could be, from a technology perspective, we could start asking questions like, they need it, where do they need it in the field? How do we give it to them, make sure that it has access via something they always have on them, their phone. We start doing these kinds of things, and we start thinking about, okay, what does it mean to be able to do a check? Does it mean just looking at the child abuse and neglect tracking system? No, it probably means being able to interact with other systems. So you start breaking down, and this is no longer an investigations module, but it's just something different. And you focus, modularity doesn't have to be about replacing the existing system or existing systems. Modularity is about not about necessarily doing an overhaul. It's about starting with the people and then going small. That allows you the opportunity to have the needs of the people drive the identification of solutions. That way you can identify solutions that leverage technology as a tool. You allow things like cloud, like analytics, like mobility, it be the basis through which modular design can now get the most out of the past in the present while planning for the future. So the next slide is some references that I include for you if you are interested.
References. Source number 1. Can Grand Design be driven to extinction? FCW. Source URL, https://fcw.com. source/articles/2010/12/13/2011-grand-design.aspx. Source number 2, OMB Report to White House, Modular Approaches for Information Technology. Source URL, https://www.whitehouse.gov/sites/default/omb/procurement/guidance/modular-approaches-for-information-technology.pdf. Source number 3, A New Approach to Procuring Government Technology in California, Code for America blog. Source URL, http://www.codefora.america.org/blog/2015/11-30/A-new-approach-to-procuring-government-technology-in-California. Source number 4, Stock Options? Don't need 'em. I'm coding for Uncle Sam. Back channel. Source URL, https://medium.com/back-channel/the-hyphen-tyni-hyphen-massive-hyphen-reform-of-hyphen-of-hyphen-government-ip-5F8-7B-85E2DC#symbol.532Q56YBAC. Source number 5, UK Government Digital Services Service Manual. Source URL, https://www.gov.uk/service-manual/start. Source number 6, US Digital Service Playbook. Source URL, https://playbook.cio.gov. Source number 7, Code for America's Best Practice. Source URL, http://www.codeforamerica.org/practices. Source number 8, California Vendor Forum, December 18th, 2015. Source URL, https://new_system/12.18.15_vendor_forum_webinar_recording.mp4. Source number 9, Micro Moments. Are you designing for them? Interaction Design Foundation. Source URL, https://www.interaction-design.org/literature/article/micro-moments-for-them.
But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Valter to share about his experience in Connecticut.
Thank you very much, Abe, and I'd like to start off by saying thank you and that it's an honor and a privilege to be here today presenting to everyone, and I'd like to thank Joyce, the ICF team, ACF for this opportunity. And I would also like to echo what Abe said about people. I believe people are the key, and as you'll see, we've been very fortunate in Connecticut to have some great people working with us over the years that have contributed to all the work we've done. So, again, we've had a lot of good people, and I can't overemphasize the importance that has played on our success. Could I have the next slide, please? So today I will be talking to you about three different areas. Really, how Connecticut came to the mindset that that put us in a path towards building modules, and I will also talk to you about the challenges we faced, how we can measure quality in software development.
Two quotes appear on screen. In reference to the challenges of change, quote, "Change is inevitable. Change is constant." Benjamin Disraeli. In reference to measures of quality, quote, "Measuring programming progress by lines of code is like measuring aircraft building progress by weight." Bill Gates.
Later on, I will be talking about how we can potentially solve some of the problems, how to make software in a faster way, cheaper, and better. I will be talking to you about what the history of modules and development of modules has been at DCF in Connecticut. And then I'll go into talking about some of the particular processes that we've used to go about building modules and how decomposing domains and 3 levels of modularity that exist. And finally, I'll wrap up with some of the lessons learned in our processes over the last 10 years. Okay, next slide, please. So, what drove us to really change and look at a modular approach? In the past, we work a lot with legacy technologies, COBOL, mainframe technologies, and really a monolithic application called Link. That technology, has become, as it ages, it's become more expensive to maintain. It's less reactive to all the business processes and the demands that have been put on us over the last years. It's really encumbered us and made it inflexible for us to choose what technologies, because the technologies are what exists, and they're hard to integrate with other technologies, and the resources for those technologies are diminishing by the day. They're also very timely and take a lot of time to test and validate their functionality, because they're monolithic and they weren't built in a way to be tested in separation. Could I have the next slide, please? So, in addition to sort of the legacy problem, we've also, over the last 10 years, have had a huge increase in demand for more processes that capture more data so that we can then utilize that data to make better decisions. Other challenges that we have seen presented is people's natural resistance to change. And so I believe some of it is based on a fear of the unknown, and also shrinking budgets. So those, with our economy the way it's been, we have to do more with less. And so our goal was really to figure out a way to create quality applications and keep up with the demands of the business with faster and with a smaller cost. Next slide, please. So in terms of measuring how much better software can be, there are qualities that every software product can be measured against.
The definition of the word quality: the standard of something as measured against other things of a similar kind. The degree of excellence of something.
There's operational characteristics, revision characteristics, and transition characteristics. And so, next slide, please. Some of those operational characteristics are really, things how correct is the application? How usable is it? What is the integrity? So are there side effects that happen because of certain case scenarios? How reliable is it? Is it breaking all the time? It runs for a while and then it stops. Is it efficient? right? So does it run fast, and is it, does it get the job done quickly? Is it secure? So how vulnerable is it to, things like hacking and, abuse and safety, right? We need to make sure that the application is safe, and depending on what industry you're in, that may be more of a concern or not. The next slide talks about interior characteristics or revision characteristics, which is more about, so as you've implemented a piece of software, you're going to want to make sure that it's maintainable and flexible, and you can change it, and you can grow it to support more people, and you can also test it quickly, and you can integrate it with other modules. So reducing your cost and making it easier to work with. And hopefully that will reduce the time that it takes to develop these applications. And finally, there's transition characteristics, right? So interoperability, which talks about connecting with other systems. So how easy is it to connect the system that you're building or the module to other systems? Reusability, which is how reusable is this module, or this cross-cutting module, which I'll talk about later, in other areas. And part of portability. So can I take this module and move it somewhere else and reuse it for other purposes? So those are the characteristics, and so those are the things we try to strive for when we're building software. And the reason we do that is covered on the next slide, because we want to make the process faster, cheaper, and better.
6 bullet points are shown. Bullet number 1, take charge of the iron triangle. Bullet number 2, don't underestimate estimation. Bullet number 3, understand the constraints. Bullet number 4, people are key to success. Bullet number 5, methodologies. This bullet features a quote from Thomas A. Edison. Quote, "There's a way to do it better. Find it." And bullet number 6, testing.
So historically, we have always been, told that there's this iron triangle of resources, which talks about, you can do better, faster, cheaper, but you can only pick 2 of those constraints. So can we go to the next slide, please? We've been told that this is the case, and you can only pick 2, and you can't improve on that. Well, I think that's that's a very fixed way of thinking, and that we can make a difference, and we can change the properties of the iron triangle. But the way we have to do that is by looking for efficiencies, right? And so today, what would something would cost to build tomorrow could be a lot different than what it costs to build today. So we can't think of things as so fixed. And so what we want to do is look for opportunities to drive efficiency and effectiveness, right? And those opportunities will then make those constraints go away, because by being more efficient, you're making the process faster, and by being more effective, you're making it potentially cheaper and also better. And so those two can coexist. So you can and modularity will help us do that by building modules and finding a way to build them effectively will naturally help us create a process where we drive efficiency and effectiveness out of that, and so then we can reapply those processes to take charge of the iron triangle and really be able to break that mold that everything is always going to be static and a constant.
Additional bullet point reads, fixed budget and resources. Try varying the scope.
Could I have the next slide, please? So, in addition to that, I think a big problem that we have today is really estimating things. There's some studies out there that show that IT projects typically underestimate things by more than 50%. You have to be aware that there's the longer a process is estimated. So the Big Bang approach that Abe spoke of, the waterfall process that people have, can take a very long time. And so there's this theory about the cone of uncertainty, which talks about that the longer you estimate something, the more likely you are to introduce error, right? Because there are dependencies and there's a lot of time in between different tasks, and so you're not taking into account a lot of things that could be hidden in between those tasks, and so that time could be really underestimated. So you want to try to keep your estimates and the amount of work that you're trying to estimate contained and to smaller chunks. And you also want to make sure to include all the different phases of the work. Also, depending on what methodologies or mechanisms you use to estimate, you should take an average and realize that people have a tendency to underestimate things. And so don't lowball your estimates. Be realistic. And also try to understand the assumptions that you're making and the risks to help you better estimate.
Additional bullet points include, when attempting something new, allow some room for more estimation error. Make sure to give the requirements and design enough time. Rework is costlier at later stages. Measure time to complete similar tasks. Reassess frequently. And average multiple estimate.
Next slide, please. So, also, in order to help you build faster, cheaper, better solutions or modules, you'll need to understand what your constraints are. So what you'll want to try to do is take those constraints and you want to understand them, what they are. You want to measure them, so measure the process, understand how long something takes, how much, and then you want to try to lean it. So there's a principle of lean that looks for different opportunities to extract things that don't add value. And so you want to try to lean that, and then you want to repeat it. So once you have a good process, you want to try to repeat it constantly, and then look for opportunities to improve it. Next slide, please. So again, to reiterate what Abe had already said, the people are really the key to the success of something like this, because and for a variety of reasons, because they're the ones that are doing the work, and if they're skilled and they're knowledgeable and they're able to look for opportunities to improve, and they will make your project successful. And so you will want to organize the people in such a fashion that it makes sense and makes them productive. You'll also want to train people, educate them, communicate the overhead. So the communication overhead will increase as the number of people increases. So just be aware that as you're adding more people to the project, your communications between different groups and different areas, different modules will increase. So you'll have to account for that. And be aware that it will take some time for the people that are added to a project to become productive. So try to plan ahead and make sure that you bring people up to speed and give them enough time to fall into the organization and learn your processes. Next slide, please. So methodology. So in software development, we have what's called a software development life cycle, right? And there's really, on a typical software development life cycle, there's a few phases. There's the project initiation, there's gathering requirements, there's design, there's an implementation phase, there's testing, and there's deployment, and then there's maintenance. Now, there are different approaches to doing this. So some are, like Abe said, monolithic, and you will do these sequentially, one at a time, and each one will take a long time because you're trying to tackle a very large problem. So you're doing, let's say, 10 different modules, and you're doing all the requirements for all those 10 modules, and then you're doing all the design for those 10 modules, and then you're doing all the implementation. You could also use this approach in a more iterative way, so in a spiral way, where you can break and decompose your larger project into modules and then follow that same life cycle for each of the different modules. In terms of methodologies, there's also been, since the 1960s, there's been a lot of methodologies that have come out, and there's been a lot of introduction of concepts. So there's, in the 70s, there was software estimation was a big thing. Software testing in the 80s was really hot. It's now also reemerged in our current era. So case tools in the 80s, Six Sigma in the 90s, Scrum, URP, Agile methods. Those are all things that have come out in the years 2000. And so there's a lot of, the bottom line is that there's a lot of methodologies, Agile. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of different interpretations. I think we should be flexible, look at each approach. Each approach will have its pros and cons, and we can learn a little bit from each. So I would say try to be agile when choosing a methodology, because there's pros and cons to each, and I think you need to customize a strategy for your team that works for you. But you definitely should adopt a strategy and commit to looking at it and continuously improving it. Next slide, please. Testing is something that I think needs to be really stressed. It's very important that as part of creating something faster, cheaper, you also consider better. So you need to look at ways to prevent defects. And one of the main reasons you want to do that is because the quicker you find a defect in the software life cycle, the cheaper it will be in the long end. So there are studies put out by NIST, National Institute for Technologies, Standards and Technology, that show that at the beginning of a project, finding a defect can cost significantly less than whether you find it at design time or when the code has already been built or it's about to be productionized. So defect prevention is key, and part of that is in order to do that, you have to build quality into your process. So you have to find ways to detect failure early. You have to find ways to test, isolate and test your different pieces of code and your different modules. And manual testing is very time consuming and is not scalable, so you want to try to strive to automate your testing. So I can't stress enough how important testing is. Next slide, please. So next I would like to do a little walk through the memory lane with you and show you what we've been through over the last 10 years here at DCF, and then talk to you a little bit about what we're looking to do for the next 5 years, and also our child welfare information system undertaking. So next slide, please. So here's a slide I've put together to kind of give you an idea of all the different modules that we've been building.
A timeline chart presents a series of modules developed in chronological order, along with the corresponding technologies and software used.
So there's sort of two efforts going on. One is really around, building the modules, and two, it's really about trying to leverage the technology that is available in order to make our processes better, faster, and more efficient. The first module that we created was background checks, right? And that was what I call the first version of our framework. And that was built right after a very significant event happened, which was the creation of something we termed the visionary architecture. So in about 2003, there was some visionary members of our agency who, after thinking about the problems that I mentioned earlier, decided that the path forward should be to create something that is more modular, more agile, that takes is able to deliver software faster without creating these large monolithic applications that we had been used to creating. So following that, there was a team put together that spent some time building a framework and created the first prototype, which is really our background checks module. That is still in existence today. We process a very large amount of background checks through it, and it was the basis for what started to be the next set of modules, which became uniform case summary, which is really a way for us to really try to tackle. It was the first attempt where we tried to tackle having the core of a SACWA system in a way and presenting the data of a SACWA system in a consistent and more uniform approach. Following that, we built a module for handling the photographs of children and associate them with our cases and our children. After that, we went on to build a 4E module, and as you can see, we actually have ended up building two. The first, which was we tried to approach it in a more of a waterfall approach, and it wasn't as successful because by the time it took so long to do, and there was changes in management and we had really missed the mark because we didn't follow some of our own principles. And so a second attempt was made at it, and that second time we did follow a lot more of the iterative approach, and so we were more successful. Out of that came another version of the framework, and subsequently we've been building module after module, and it's anywhere between 6 months to a year, and we've been just cranking through these modules, as you can see. So even at certain times, 2 and 3 of these modules have been built at the same time. The latest module that we're currently working on is for our CFSR reviews, and this module will be live around April this year, and there's already plans to extend it to have additional components. I'd just like to point out that through all this time as we're building modules, the challenge was to find also time in between building these modules to upgrade the technology. And as you can see, that's very key because as we build these modules, we want to continue to upgrade the technologies that were used because we can then we're making the process more efficient, and we can build better modules faster. So we're picking up speed, and we can build more with less. Next slide, please. So the road ahead for us, I believe, is really around a few areas. One, again, automated testing and continuous integration. Those are two things that we have, began to look into. I think we've made some great, in the last year or two, we've made we've overcome some challenges in that area, but I still think there's a lot of work to be done there, and that is really one of our bottlenecks is in the testing arena, and so we will continue to invest into those areas to make sure that our not only can we build applications faster, we can deliver them faster. Code generation, this is an area where we've always been improving, but I think there's some other newer opportunities that we can look at, and so code generation allows us to reuse templates and basically produce code that follows certain patterns, and thus eliminates a lot of the time-consuming parts of writing repetitive code. Refactoring and taking a look at all the things that we've built in the past, and refactoring, meaning extracting a lot of those commonalities and making them into reusable, cross-cutting concern modules. For example, security, logging, our data access layer. So taking a look at those items and making sure that we have something that can be reused across all applications and all modules. We're also going to have to definitely take a look at new versions of the stack, which seem to be coming out anywhere between every year to every year and a half. There's always a new version of Visual Studio, a new version of our APIs, tools, the IDE, the source control system that we use. So we have to keep that in mind and make sure we continue to leverage and upgrade those systems. And also taking advantage of some of the ideas of a service bus, which I'll be talking a little bit on later on. At the same time, we also have a challenge to make sure that we continue to support some of the legacy applications, migrate some of the legacy applications, and keep an eye on our backlog of applications, which grows at the change of business, so that it's growing constantly, the number of applications and modules that people are, would like us to build. Next slide, please. So also just a quick mention here, where like Abe and Joyce mentioned earlier, we are working on a CCWIS system, and we've got a really solid foundation, I believe. The key to that has been for us to put together a great team that not only encompasses folks from our technology areas, but also from the business. And I think that's really going to help make this project successful, because without technology you can't do the project, and without the business knowledge you can't do these type of projects. You really need the two teams working together. And so I think we've done a good job in that area. Obviously, there's always resource constraints that we have to deal with, but I think those will be dealt with, and we'll be able to continue functioning. We've also began to really take a close look at building out the functional domains that would spell out how we would decompose a CWIS application, and we currently have it broken down into 11 modules, functional modules, and one technical module. And our next, we've been doing a lot of process flows, because we believe that again, it's about getting it right to begin with and understanding what we're trying to build, and really leaning the processes and the domains so that we don't have to incur the cost of changes later on. And currently we are looking to put out an RFP sometime in the second quarter of this year for the modules of a system. Next slide, please. So next I will talk to you about when we're building, so there's really three different areas that I see in terms of modularity, right? There's different zoom levels, or thinking about modular that I can tell. There are components, so sort of in the software that we're building, we have modular components, right? So think of Legos. So there are Legos that we can build that then stack on top of other Legos so that we can build a huge Lego land set. There's also the framework that we use to do that, because by building a framework, we then can take advantage of efficiencies in the process.
A quote is featured on the slide. Quote, "There are two ways of constructing a software design. One way is to make it so simple that there are obviously no deficiencies, and the other way is to make it so complicated that there are no obvious deficiencies. The first method is far more difficult." C.A.R. Hoare.
And there's also external systems, and being able to connect our modules to external modules and potentially our applications to external applications. Next slide, please. So I will be talking to you about modular criteria and domain modules. What is a domain module? How do you define a domain module? And how to go about modeling the domain. Next slide, please. So one definition of modular design is that it is a logical partitioning of the software to allow for complex software to be manageable and for the purposes of implementation and maintenance. So partitioning may be based on related functions, implementation, data links, and other criteria. And Abe did a great job, I think, in explaining that a module doesn't just have to be thought of as a, something like intake. It could be something technical. It could be a document management module. There are 5 criteria that can be used to identify be used to specify a module. How decomposable is it, right? So does it solve a specific problem or a set of subproblems? Composability. So can it be put together? Can that module interact with other modules and be put together to solve a larger problem? Understandability. Will this module? Is this a module, and does it function on its own without any other pieces? Continuity. So can the changes that you make to a module have localized effects and not affect anything else? And protection. So can it be developed in a way that when it fails, it doesn't affect other areas? So by looking at these criteria, you can say, okay, does this meet the definition of a module? Next slide, please. Domain module. So when you're trying to define a module, you'll want to, one of the things you can do is decompose that into a set of domains. So you can try to take, you can create models and try to take the domains and break them down into pieces of functionality within your organization that your teams and your organization can talk about and identify with. You can also reuse these models to maintain them and reflect how you do business. And then you can also have show that these modules can have reusability and are self-contained and can be tested on their own. Next slide, please. So when you're trying to define the domain and the boundaries, your domain model should really try to focus on specific operations of the business. You should align with the business processes. Again, you should align with what people really need and what they're doing. And again, Abe has spoken to that today. You should isolate that domain from other domains and make sure it works well within your application and can stand alone. And you should make it reusable to try to avoid to duplicate any of the functionality in that domain in other domains. Next slide, please. Again, just some more that these models should be loosely coupled, meaning there's less dependencies between each of the different models. You want to try to separate the layers of these domains, meaning so if you've implemented a module using certain components of database on the database access layer and a set of business rules and a user interface, you want to try to separate those layers to make it easier to test, version, and maintain. You should try to maintain the minimum amount of dependencies in those modules and the frameworks that you use. Next slide, please. So again, you want to make sure you document those business processes so that way when you turn it over to a team that does design and then does implementation, they have a better understanding of what those processes that they're modeling is. And there's different ways, depending on what methodology you pick, there's different ways to document. You want to try to also document your relationships and dependencies and try to figure out what are the cross-cutting concerns, separate those. You want to try to separate your domain logic from your user interface logic because you might be using your domain logic and presenting it in different ways. And you want to try to take advantage of modern programming principles like object-oriented principles, which is a whole other topic that we just don't have the time to discuss today. Dependency injection and aspect-oriented programming to increase the modularity, reduce the dependencies, and reduce coupling of modules.
Additional bullet points include create business processes and work with subject matter experts.
Next slide, please. So, components in a software module can be developed so that you can sort of reuse components and, like I said before, build a system that is made of smaller components that can then be used to create a module. Next slide, please. When building modules, it's also important for you to have a framework. In a way, it is its own module, and there's a few things that you have to consider. You have to consider your environment. So if you are developing software, you are going to, and you want to make it efficient, you are going to need environments. So typically, you'll see in most organizations a development, a QA, a user acceptance testing, and a production. Some organizations use more, some less, but you should have that environment because that will help you to make sure that you promote your applications, you are integrating your applications, you are testing, and you can do it efficiently and not just take your applications and toss them into production and let the users find all the problems with those applications. You should have a process for moving those applications along and identifying problems with them and being able to test them and create quality in your product. You should also be using an IDE, an integrated development environment, a source control system, and take advantage of those systems to create quality builds, to test, to program faster, take advantages of source control to make sure you have a history of your changes and be able to keep track of changes and be able to create different builds depending on your needs. You should also look at object-oriented techniques, like I said, and using patterns. And there's principles in object-oriented development and programming called SOLID that I would encourage you to look at as well. And those are all principles that really encourage decoupling and improving the ability to test applications and reusability. One of the other things that you want to try to do to, again, improve some of those qualities we talked about earlier is build N-tier applications. What that means is the application itself and the components should be broken down into different layers, environments. So you have your client tier, you have your server user interface tier, you have your business logic or business rule tier, sometimes you may have an extra tier there for your service tier, and then you can also have your data access layer tier. And the reason you want to really structure this way is because there are different concerns in each of these tiers, and you want to separate those concerns so that makes it easier to develop, easier to test, easier to maintain, and it's more scalable. It's a more scalable architecture. There are advantages to using web-based, so for example, not having to deploy applications to PCs. So that is the strategy that we have taken, being able to take advantage of not having to install applications, being cross-platform. People, our customers, our users can be on different platforms. They could be on a PC, they could be on a Mac, they could be on a mobile device. So taking advantage of web-based languages, and that will make you more flexible and agile. You do definitely, I believe, want to, if you're developing your own modules and not integrating, try to standardize the amount of languages, the amount of APIs that you're using. That will make you faster and be able to easier reuse and train your staff. In addition to that, you'll also want to try to, if not consolidate to one database, try to pick a standard. You could always make sure that your database access layer has an abstraction that allows you to use different databases to be more consistent and efficient when using different databases. And again, try to leverage the different libraries that are out there. There's many and APIs that will help you not have to write everything from scratch and be able to make your applications run faster, and also take advantage of the fact there's many users using those APIs and those libraries have been tested, and so that allows you to then take advantage of the fact that that is a very robust library that will cause you less problems in the future and give you a lot of efficiencies. And finally, try to take the cross-cutting concerns and create modules around or components around the common themes like security, logging, data access, and user interfacing. Next slide, please. So SOA is a service-oriented architecture, is a large topic, which again, I won't have the opportunity to talk to you in detail today, but I just wanted to mention it because when you're trying to integrate different modules across domains, so meaning maybe between our agency and one of our sister agencies, let's say the Department of Social Services, you'll want to try to use the principles of service-oriented architectures. You'll want to try to leverage the great deal of technology that goes and benefits that come along with web services and XML. There's also a lot of great material that you can leverage to create service-oriented architecture based on a service bus and architecture based on a service bus. to try to integrate your applications and your modules with other applications and modules that may be built using different technologies. And also at the same time, I would like to stress out the importance of building or having a component or a module that focuses around master data, and specifically in our case, building a component that is that focuses on the master person index, because when you're sharing data across domains, one of the keys to doing that is really having services on both sides that can talk the same, that can share the same IDs, and having a consistent knowledge of what you're asking for from both sides. So you're exchanging data, and you need to have a common identifier to be able to query each of the different systems to get you that data. And so you'll also, as you try to create a master person index, you'll also want to try to leverage and create a system or a module around governing the quality of those indexes and what data is being matched between both sides, and make sure you try to keep that data between, that is the key to accessing all the modules, in sync. Next slide, please.
Sure. Valter, this is Elizabeth. I just wanted to alert you that we're near the end of our time, and I do want to open up for questions. So if we could just maybe do these
I'll
really
just
quickly.
wrap up.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So, next slide, please. So the lessons learned for us has been you have to understand the business needs, and you have to align to those business needs. Again, this should not be just an IT effort. It needs to be a joint effort between the business. And so you need to try to align the needs of the software with the needs of the business. And also remember that key are very important. The people are a key, and they're very important to your successful plan. And that you're always you want to try to strive to achieve in your design those software qualities and improvements.
Additional bullet points include: have a strategy and always look to improve, and be inclusive. Realize the value of joint application development, JAD, and subject matter experts, SMEs.
Next slide, please. Again, test is it's very important, and have a strategy for that. Make sure you don't forget to invest in your research and technology, because that will drive efficiencies. Make sure you try to build models and build prototypes, because that will help you see things that and estimate better, and see things that you may have missed in just your regular business documentation, and help you get better understanding of what you're trying to build. And then use the principles of all the different patterns and principles of latest software development techniques to try to drive efficiency into your projects. Next. So lastly, don't be afraid to experiment. You learn a lot from experimenting, even if you sometimes are not building what you originally thought you were building.
An additional bullet point reads: use techniques of CI, TDD, and iterative development in order to reduce communication overhead, improve quality, and allow for better scalability.
So thank you, and I'd again like to take this opportunity to thank everybody, and I can turn it over to Joyce now. Thank you.
References. Source number 1, Software Development Philosophies. Source URL, https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/list_of_software_development_philosophies. Source number 2, Software Development Principles and Quality Characteristics. There are 2 source URLs. First source URL, http:// www.cs.cornell.edu/tilde symbol DPH/papers/PRINCIPLES.pdf. Second source URL, http://www.sqa.net/ISO9126.html. Source number 3, component-based development. Source URL, http://arxiv.org/ftp/arxiv/papers/1011.2163.pdf. Source number 4, domain-driven design. Source URL, http://www.infaq.com/articles/ddd-in-practice. Source number 5, object-oriented programming. Source URL, http://www.codeprodect.com/articles/22769/introduction-to-programming-concept. Source number 6, aspect-oriented programming. Source URL, http://core-java/i-want-my-AOP-part-1.html. Source number 7, legacy technology. Source URL, https://hbr.org/2015/05/breaking-the-death-legacy-technologies. Source number 8, SOA. There are two source URLs. Source URL number 1, http://www.service-architecture.com/articles. Source URL number 2, http://www.ibm.com/developerworks/library/ws-top10. Source number 9, estimation. There are two source URLs. Source URL number 1, https://www.targetprocess.com/articles/estimates-software-development. Source URL 2, http://www.cone_leadership/books/the_cone_of_uncertainty. Joyce resumes as presenter.
Yes, thank you very much. And to all of our attendees, we apologize a bit for running over. I'm hoping that some of you can stay on the line. There's a tremendous amount of information that has been shared with you by Abe and Valter. Elizabeth, could we open up the Q&A for maybe 5 minutes?
Sure, absolutely.
Please.
Yes, Julie, could you let our audience know how they can queue up for questions on the phone? And then you're also welcome to submit questions via the chat box on GoToWebinar.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1, and you will be prompted to record your first and last name. Please unmute your phone when recording your name, and to withdraw your question, press *2. One moment, please.
Elizabeth replies.
Great, thank you, Julie. And Joyce, at this time, we don't have any questions on the text box, so I just wanted to jump in and thank both of our presenters today for covering the topic so thoroughly. I think we could easily have doubled our time and still had more content to cover, so thank you so much for being so thorough and diligent in your presentation. And again, for folks on the phone, please feel free to submit questions either via the chat box or via the phone.
So, I do have a question to Valter, and that's as you had the slide, the road to whatever, tracing the timeline of developing your modules.
Yes.
There were some overlaps, and my question is, how large are your teams that develop the modules, and do they overlap? Do they have overlapping team members?
Yes, they do. So the team sizes have been anywhere from 2 developers to 4 developers, and in addition to that, we've also had other people on the project, such as DBAs, and those have been usually 1 or 2, and production support folks, obviously, that have helped us with the environment and other technical matters and code promotion. So, and yes, they a lot of times they have been reused because we reuse the same developers. Obviously, people come and go, but we try to again try to stick with a pattern of development and try to make it into sort of a software factory that we're creating, where things get created in a consistent way. And so we've been able to drive a lot of efficiency by using people that are knowledgeable about our process and can then produce software faster and using some of the same techniques that across the different modules.
Great. Thank you. Elizabeth, do we have any questions that people want to ask? Or should we move on to the conclusion?
Nothing via chat. Julie, do we have anyone on the phone line?
I'm showing no phone questions at this time.
Okay. Joyce, why don't I go ahead and turn it back to you then, and we'll go ahead and wrap up for today.
Fantastic. So we hope that this information shared with you today was both informative and valuable, and it was very, very detailed. And I want to thank our presenters. As a reminder, please remember to register for the February webinar once the announcement is released. Additionally, if you have any questions regarding today's topic and would like more information about any of our scheduled webinars, or would like to volunteer your state as a topic presenter, please do not hesitate to contact me at the email listed above.
Joyce can be reached via email at joyce@kassets.com. Recorded versions of the webinars are available at https://www.acf.hhs.gov/cb/research-data-info-systems/training.
In fact, because we cut our Q&A short, if you have questions, please send them to me and I will get them to our presenters. Again, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available online. When it is complete and posted, we will send a message via the SACWIS Managers listserv with a link. As a reminder, at present there are 24 webinars covering assorted topics ranging from 2013 to 2016 that have been published online. Again, thank you for attending. Goodbye.